Mitch, I know we are looking for a working title, but we cannot name the podcast The Business of Theater Heart, Hustle, Survival.
The reason we can't?
Because Heart, Hustle, Survival is the title of a report that just came out from TCG about the realities of making a living and a life in the theater.
And it's an amazing report. It's a survey. I mean, so
Yeah.
you always have to take that grain of salt based on who are the people that responded. But first of all, Theater Communication Group,
Yeah,
TCG.
TCG.
They represent all the regional theaters and many nonprofit theaters in New York.
Hmm.
Some of them very small and some of them very powerful and rich. So it's a wide range of theaters.
Yeah.
Um, and
So do we have a link in the show notes for that? But we'll unpack it a little bit more once we get into the episode. This is The Business of Theater, a working title.
you are Darnell Radford. I'm Mitch Weiss.
And
I'm
let's get
messing
down
this
to
up.
business. No, that's fine. So we'll get down to business now. Okay, so some key takeaways from this survey, this report, which you will see, is that I'll just read from the press release that 73.3% of respondents have considered or already left the theater field due to financial constraints.
No
And
surprise there, is it?
yeah, and then we just think about it, how it's TCG, Theater Communications Group. It's likely that larger companies were in a better position to contribute to this, but it's hard to tell. We just know that in this percentage, this is what their findings have. And, if you are in theater, I'm sure you've had a conversation with someone who is doing everything they can to make ends meet. And the financial struggles in the arts are nothing new. And many of our artists, particularly theater artists, at some point can speak to the struggle of making ends meet, also while pursuing the craft that they love so much.
And again, this is not statistical, but
Hmm.
just from many people I know, when the time comes in one's life that you're thinking of having a spouse and a family, whether male or female, then and if you haven't been working steadily, it comes down to, I had fun. I like being part of the community, but I need to get a profession.
Yeah.
I mean, 73% is very large. If someone had told me 50%, I'd believe that in a heartbeat. But 73%, it says a lot to those of us who have longevity, who have just decided that somehow, instead of, I guess, you wait on tables, you work for a producer as an assistant, you become an usher, you sell candy at the back of the theater, you work for your uncle's pharmacy on the summer months when you're not working. You do whatever you have to do to say, I am still in the theater.
Yeah.
But 73% are saying they've either left or are considering. The considerer I get. But if they've left already, that means they had family needs and they had to make a living.
Yeah. And it's sad too, because while you do understand that, like during the pandemic, there were many theater artists who ended up getting their real estate licenses
Hmm.
and started pursuing that kind of work. Now, no, it does kind of make sense. You are putting on a show, you're sort of presenting yourself in a way to sell this house. And I think there are theatrical skills that could carry. And there's a lot of artists that I know who are real estate agents, either there's a lot more flexibility in that, I think, too, which allows some of the people that I know that are still active in the community while having a role like that. But yeah, sometimes the changes in our business make you make choices where you leave the primary areas where our business thrives.
Hmm.
If you live in the suburbs where there may not be a theater near you, you do have to unfortunately let go of this commitment to theater if it's not even realistic for you to get from where you currently live now to a theater that you would work with.
And another thing that occurred to me, I know of two people who were working all the time. One a stage manager, one an actor, but their parents got ill and they had to go home wherever that was. I think one was in Indiana, the other was in New York, and they literally have to take care of them. So they can't work because theater doesn't allow part-time work.
And that's not a new thought either. I know
Hmm.
quite a few people who had to, put this on hold to be there for their families.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we could talk forever about those financial constraints because we all feel it and it's all very relevant. But I'll go into one of the other talking points. Hustle work shows the least amount of fluctuation between theater work and non-theater work with a median percentage of 25% and 20% for each category respectively on median for
That
respondents.
sounds like gobbledygook.
Doesn't it?
Translate. I thought the translation was maybe I'm talking about this. 26.5% of respondents believe they have usually or always been paid an equitable wage over the last 5 years. So they did the survey about post pandemic. So we did not use the pandemic as an excuse, although it did affect everything,
Yeah.
even post pandemic. So I think on the hustle work, you have to find work that doesn't drive you crazy, but can bring you enough income that you can make up for the fact that theater, even when you get the job, doesn't pay well.
Hmm. Yeah.
Unless you are, and it's a handful. It's always nice to see a working Broadway actor or a theater actor who has a TV show on Netflix, and that lets them save the money so that they can afford to work on Broadway or off Broadway. Union wages do not cover a decent rent in New York City, right? So you have to find other work. It has to be
Yeah.
part of your concept. But I think the line was, which I think I heard you say, the income generating work aligns with their personal values, meaning they don't go working at the sanitation department if they hate picking up garbage. They
Yeah.
find work that they can tolerate that sometimes gobbles up their career
Mhm.
because that's the thing making money,
Yeah.
right?
That's very true, and I can speak to that as well. I've always said that I've had sort of parallel career paths where I'm sometimes pursuing the IT path, the information technology path, and then and other times I'm pursuing the theater path. And the two, at least for me, have supported each other. The things I learn in IT, I can definitely bring over to the theater world in terms of like efficiency and optimization and keeping things running smoothly. And so that's been really helpful, but it's not always the case for everyone who is seeing some other opportunity. Traditionally and kind of stereotypically, for a theater artist who is an actor, maybe looking for a job that has more flexibility. And it has traditionally been frontline services, you know, hosting.
Catering. Catering's a big thing because you can turn down a job if you
Hmm.
have an important audition. And you can also leave the entire industry of catering if you get a job in the theater and then come
Yeah,
back to it because your boss will remember you knew how to work it and
yeah,
they always need help.
exactly. And of course, that has been a storyline in many of plays.
Yeah. Yeah. But I'm fascinated that it's 26%
Mhm.
that who believe that they've never been paid a decent wage.
Yeah, and honestly, I think if they dug deeper, they
I'm
would
sorry, it's the
also
opposite. 26% believe they have been paid a decent wage.
usually or always been paid an
Right.
equitable wage, and I wonder if it's this. So I remember early on when I very much established my interest in theater, but was also pursuing IT roles. I was talking to an IT person who was saying that, when you work for a nonprofit, you have to accept that you're going to make less than a for-profit job would pay you to do the same thing. And sometimes that is kind of a mindset. It's also very similar if you work for the city government. The city government doesn't pay as much as this role might be in the private sector.
Conceptually, and I don't know that this is true because I've battled this my whole life, that the jobs that are going to pay you the good bucks are the ones that the people I know complain about the most. So, I'd
Yeah.
like to believe that you get a factory job and you hate it because it's, just you don't get to use your brain, or you work at Amazon packing boxes or something, but that they pay better than theater. The other way to look at it is lawyers. Lawyers make a lot of money, but the lawyers that I work with that have something to do with entertainment law, you can feel the stress in their bones and the way they talk to you. When you get them to laugh, it's like they almost don't want to leave your phone call because they're having a moment. And yet I know they're charging me by that moment that I made them laugh. Right. And that's a problem. So I want to get off the phone.
Mhm.
And of course, in the industry, we don't get paid by the hour. We
Yeah.
just work day and night. We think about it when we sleep. We think about it over breakfast. We don't take lunch, even though we're allowed to get lunch. Right? That's the
It's
difference.
that hourly moment that has become it's become sort of a, cultural comment if you are someone who takes too long. If you're taking too long at some task, the question is, "What are you, hourly?"
Yeah.
Like, you're just
Yeah.
trying to drag this out so you can get your hours worth. Yeah, it is interesting how some of this is saying like, the way I read the hustle work statement, it sounded so convoluted, but they're basically saying, like, the hustle work between either theater work as your hustle job versus non-theater work as your hustle job, there isn't too much of a difference in it, is what they're saying. And so
Between
that's
you
sort of
and me,
interesting.
it would be nice if they worded it that way.
I know,
The
yeah.
I
I
don't
had
get
to
why people use this legalese crap. It just doesn't work.
I had to read it again to make sense. I'm like, "I know they read this back. It has to make sense. Maybe my cadence wasn't there." Okay, so, another finding that they bulleted here is that 86.2% of respondents say their housing needs are completely or mostly met.
That doesn't make any
This
sense to me, even though
well,
I get
they're saying even with the stats of this report, these people are reporting a higher percentage of the people who responded are reporting that they are mostly meeting their housing needs. And I wonder if you drill down deeper, you start to find out that there are roommates, that there
yeah.
are, perhaps you got married and now you're sharing expenses, or you've just settled for less
Well,
and said,
I would
I'm making it
question
work.
whether the respondents to this survey are people who are older, since they were already talking about that they've considered leaving the business.
Hmm.
That's not someone who's 23, right? And the
Yeah,
23, 27-year olds are still looking for, where do I live? How many roommates do I have? How can I pay my rent? And I wonder if they answered this survey. Again, that's part of the problem with these things. They don't start with, hey, 48% of these people were over the age of 72. Give us a little clue of who was answering this. You're right.
I mean, it is a long document, so they may have more information as you scroll through.
I,
We're just
uh,
just getting through the gist of it so that you can then explore it for yourself. It says in general that the topics explored in the report include income distribution across heart, hustle, and survival work, housing security and renter versus homeowner breakdowns, access to healthcare, student loan burdens, and
the
safety, and the
the
COVID-19 pandemic's,
the other
lingering
the
impacts.
other thing that I wonder is living in New York and working in New York or in Philadelphia. is different than if you're working in Chicago, Minneapolis, Louisville, Dallas, Texas, Miami. The theater communities, which may be smaller, which may have cheaper housing, which may be suburban, which all of these things change what your expectations are, how far your money goes. And I do know from having worked in Massachusetts and in Minnesota and in Virginia that people there really thought of their theater job as part time. They would go to rehearsal, but always had a regular gig on the other hours. And they would do a show for 8 weeks, and then they'd go and take time off and go back to the other job, or which they had continued as much as they could during their time on the show. So I wonder how this balances. Again, it's important to know what your clientele is for these surveys. Just like the polls in theater, if you go up in New York, if you go to Staten Island, you're going to be talking to mostly Republicans. If you talk in Manhattan, you're going to be talking to mostly Democrats. Where was the survey taken? Right?
So it says, grounded in responses from 188 theater workers, the majority of whom are based in New York City. This
Okay.
report reflects the
Interesting.
lived experiences of artists in one of the most vital yet challenging arts ecosystems in the country.
All
Yeah.
right. That's interesting.
So I was going to say, now that this report is out there and it's food for thought, because if it's mainly comprised of New York workers, it's just like anything else that comes out of New York. You sort of look at it and say, how does this scale down to my region, and what can I take from this as well? I would say, now that we know this data, what should change in arts organizations, because arts organizations continue to chase funds for various programming, but it seems like this part of it isn't part of the changing, isn't the growth that's happening. It's like, let's build another wing instead of adequately compensating our staff, you know, because of various funds. Nobody's supporting operating. So unless the staff that you hire is tied to your programming, there isn't much room to offer them more than you've already had.
And what goes along with that that I find most interesting is that if you do find donors, forget the grant programs for a moment or the foundations, if you find donors that give you money, I've spoken to some who say, will this money filter down to the workers? Or is it going to be spent on a bigger set? Are they going to pay more for the costumes on the next two shows? How do I know where my money's going? Colleges, by the way, have the same problem. They have the category, give your donation in the places where they're most needed, or you can give them just directly to scholarships, or you can give
Mhm.
you have those options. Theater doesn't really provide that. It doesn't say you can help people make a living with the organization. They just give you some money, and then it's how the artistic director and the other lead people decide to use it, right?
Yeah. I think it's interesting because it's not the audience's responsibility to adequately compensate the actors, the artists in the production. And so I think if they were to say, "Do you know a $100?" Like, I know sometimes there is a breakdown. Do you know $100 covers an actor's rehearsal process for, I don't know, whatever the time frame is? And that's something to just know, but it's really not the position of a don't, of a patron to be paying your salaries.
You're 100% right. So then the question becomes, we've had this discussion. We've talked to people who are writing books about this discussion. What are the leaders in theater doing with their money? One of the problems, as we know on Broadway, sets and costumes and lights and props cost a fortune, not just because they're expensive, but because there's so many of them and they are competing with Disney. The idea is we need a spectacular show. People need to walk out of here singing the costumes because that's what people want. They want to be an extravaganza. What regional theaters used to do is they used to help foster new works and let new writers come in and say, well, we can't afford to spend a ton of money on this because we don't know if it's going to work. But let's have as many new works as we can. Let's work with as many artists as we can. Let's spend the money there. And of course, I'm very proud that the farm that I run, that we have spend almost nothing on sets and costumes and props, yet we have some. But we concentrate on the playwright, the play, and the actors and the people working on the show. But again, that would be an argument for an artistic or managing director to make to their donors to say, we need more money because we want to give you the sets, but we also want to pay our people. So when I told you that we need our budget this year is $1 million, what I really should tell you, our budget this year is $1.5 million, because realistically our budget, and we may not make $1.5 million, but we've got to do right by the people working here and right by you, the audience. And this is what it costs to do what we want to do. And I
Yeah.
find so many people, I'm going to even return to Broadway. I worked for a general manager who was lovely to work for. And we worked in a hellhole. Here in New York, he had a dirty one-room office with a ratty rug, and he was running 2 Broadway and 1 off-Broadway shows at the same time. And his line to me always was, well, in order for me to get the job being general manager for a show, I feel I need to explain to the producer that I don't spend money on management. I spend all my money on the show. And I looked at him and say, well, who wants to work for you? Unless, don't you want them to come in and say, oh, at least his office is clean? Right? You have a standard. You don't have to have look at Hamilton. The Hamilton offices and the Wicked offices go on forever. They're big corporations. But
Mm.
most Broadway theater producers and general managers have very reasonable places, but they're clean. Their workers get to feel like there's a room with a small refrigerator. You can leave your lunch there. Something that just tells you I'm worth something. And I wondered, I'm going off here on this, but I wonder how many artistic directors, how many theater companies care about their workers and
Yeah.
what they're working in. Even if you're going to say you're only going to make $26,000 this year total, but we take you out to dinner 3 times. We make sure that the bathrooms are clean. We make sure you have a desk area that you can actually set up. We make sure you get some home time with your family. Whatever it is, we're taking your time and respecting you.
Yeah.
And then, God forbid, they say, and we're going to pay you $35,000 instead of $29,000, right?
Well, I think there's a lot of interesting things that are about this, right? I have been of the ilk of like wanting to take care of everybody, wanting them to feel comfortable in a space, but sometimes they are just the artists are more interested in getting to the rest of their lives, and going back to, are we finished here? Great. Then I'm gonna go. It's like, "No, we're just having a little get together, we order food and everything." It's like, "No, I gotta go." But that's
You're reading me wrong. The parties aren't the important part of this.
I'm saying, like, the extra things that you do to take care of them so that when they're in your space, they don't have arguably a need, like, they don't have a want for things.
And the place I disagree is having coffee or water available for them to refill their water bottles. All of that helps the environment. That is respectful. I have actually watched actors walk into a rehearsal room and say, I have my water bottle. Is there any place I can get water? And when you go, yes, they actually have a refill station over there Not in the bathroom, you don't have to turn on the faucet. There's
Yeah,
one by the sink in the green room. Great, thank you. They actually get excited, and all they want is water.
because it's simple things that just make it
Yeah,
easy. Yeah.
they do. But that a lot of places I've seen them, they don't have that stuff. They don't have the free coffee at rehearsal. They don't, especially when you're asking for favors, you know?
What is your thought? Let's look at the actors, for example.
Mhm.
You're a member of Actors Equity. Actors Equity Association has a, sort of a base requirement for actors at certain levels, depending on, what contracts you're dealing with.
Right.
And so if a company only budgets for the base salary, what do you think about that? Thinking that equity has set this standard at this point to give the appearance of this being equitable from here. Anything here and up is considered equitable.
I being a union member, not of Equity, but a union member, we have always from when I was first studying to get into my union, we were always taught union rule books and rates are only the minimum. You always can ask for more. That in mind, as a producer, I look at I may not be able to afford to offer you any more than minimum, or at least I don't think I want to, but I will budget in there. You know what? I'll take, just happened to be we walked out and we passed the deli and I got myself a coffee. I'm going to buy you one. It's a whopping $2. And that, though, can be out of my personal pocket, or I can just expect there are niceties that you do for people. One very small example, when I was managing a chorus line, and Donna McKechnie was still the star of a chorus line, Tony winner for the show, I was given a $10 a week um, discretionary fund. Now, come on, $10. This is back in the 1980s. Okay, it's a long time ago. So
Mhm.
maybe now that would have been $40 a week, meaning I did not have to turn in a receipt. I did not have to explain who I was spending it on. But what I used it for is when Donna had a birthday, I went out, I bought roses, and I had it on her dressing room table. And I signed the producer's name to it. I had no one to ask. There's no budget for gifts. People have birthdays. There was no budget for that. It's a Broadway show. You pay people what the union tells you to pay them. But you have to have these small things where you're saying, I'm thinking about you as a total human, not just someone I hired at union rates. And that's all
Mhm.
I'm thinking at this point.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that to point at a specific organization. I'm just saying, because I think there are times where I'm saying, like, I don't like, I know that money is tight, right? But you've had to have heard from your own staff that they don't feel adequately compensated. And there has to be someone on your team that is reminding you or in promotion of increasing elements of the budget every year as a practice. You know, like this is somewhat standard. You should always solve for the cost of living. You should always raise your budget to meet all of those things. And sometimes you work at an organization where things have stayed put. Like most people who are in nonprofits right now can probably say that they may not have received any kind of increase since before the pandemic because the pandemic was a shock for everyone. They weren't sure if they were getting PPE loans and made decisions before they got those loans, and then when they got those loans said, "Well, we already made those decisions, and so perhaps we don't need to go back on our plan when we've already laid a plan."
Right.
And then there were many organizations who, became reliant on that additional funding, that was coming through for pandemic and shuttered venues and all that good stuff. And now they don't have a way forward without that funding.
And that's why you can't the word is we take care of ourselves because we
Yeah.
can't count on anybody, right? But along with that, if we're the leader of our organization, we take care of other people as well. That's part of the job. Now, sometimes you can't. I mean, bank accounts run out of money, right? Budgets tell you what you don't have. But the goal should always be in your mind, I'm trying to make things better. My argument has been, as being a member of Art New York and the Alliance of Resident Theaters, and which used to be the Off Broadway Alliance. So these are very small theaters. My argument is that if you exist for 5 years and you haven't been able to raise your budget, you haven't accomplished anything significant for your own mission, it's time to just go away and start over, because growth is what theater ought to be about. Your entire mission could be one show. That's fine. Did you do the one show? If you got to do one show in the first year and your mission is 5 years later, we want to be a working theater company, and in the fifth year, you do one show again and for a couple of weeks, then my question is, other than your personal sandbox, does your organization serve a purpose other than for you? And it doesn't make it bad. It's just a recognition. This is not a working organization. This is a private mechanism for you to do the one show you want to do.
Yeah.
That's okay, but recognize it. Look,
It's
we're
very
we're
true.
we're tough. It's tough. There are no answers. You and I are talking, we've been talking for years with each other. I look at, I started one of the first places with New York Shakespeare Festival, the largest nonprofit in the world at one point. And we had so much going on, and every year there was more that we did. We added jazz programs. We added a film program, film restoration. We don't need another film program. We were doing television. We had free Shakespeare in the Park. We were doing 27 new original plays a year. No one's heard of that since then. Now, what are they doing? 3 a year? 4? So, what the question is, I mean, and you're allowed to fall down and the whole thing. And that money was okay. Instead of just resting on your laurels, what more can we or should we be doing? And part of that is, do we compensate the people working here? And what happens if we don't continue on the upward road? Do we have a way to bring the salaries back down to we can continue to operate? And I think that's always the fear of a nonprofit. If we start raising people's salary because we had a really good year, what happens next year when we don't have a really good year? So let's keep them low. And my argument is then find a way to make up and let those people participate in the good year financially. Make it a bonus, right? Do something. You were talking about salaries. I just have to share this. When I was a group sales agent for a chorus line, long before I became a manager, I was making $400 a week. Okay. By the way, the group sales organization took in $1 million a year in group sales, but I was making $400 a week. And I was the only employee, by the way.
What?
Okay, hold on. Nowadays, a friend of mine just got a job working for a Broadway producer as an office assistant. Like my group sales, it was a starting position. He's making $450 a week. I was working in 1980. He's working in 2025. A
Wow.
$50 a week difference for starting salaries. Something's wrong.
Yeah. I wonder there is I mean, I kinda saw this in museums too, that I work in museums at sometimes in my life. Perhaps the organization just doesn't see the value of their frontline staff, you know? It's like they're the first people that any of your patrons meet, and they tend to be the lowest paid.
Well, and you can start them there, but you have to say, hey, if we decide you're doing a good job, We
Yeah.
might have a promotion for you to a different job and then bring in a new frontline person, or we're just going to give you a little, raise your salary a little bit. You don't have to go crazy. They're
I
not going
think
to
this is
make the same as the producer, right?
I think this is kind of the problem. There isn't much of a pipeline in many of these organizations. The thought is this position is filled right now and we don't have to worry about it until it needs to be filled again. And then at that time, they start to realize a couple of things. One, we've been in kind of a rhythm with this person who was here for so long. And now that they've left, perhaps now we're looking for some new infusion into our organization. And so they'll pass off somebody who's in the organization already as said, for an opportunity to grow because now they have an opportunity to get somebody fresh and new in.
Hmm.
And they don't necessarily think about, well, no, we've been prepping our bench and the people who are underneath them are next in line. It's not al it doesn't always work like that, and perhaps that is something that more should think about. Like, you shouldn't have to do a big old push for somebody. If you lose a marketing director, if you have a marketing associate, or you have other people who work in marketing who could interim in that for however long you think you need to feel confident about them moving into the role.
Well,
But, like, if you put somebody else in there, they're gonna have their mindset of people that they would like to bring into the organization. You might not have any opportunity to
and
grow.
you used the key phrase bring into the organization. And that's where the mindset, I think, is wrong and has been since I've been around. I do know, and I'm proud of this, when I was in charge of hiring staff for a large theater, I was always, always looking for overqualified people. So if we needed somebody to come in as the assistant to the assistant in the press department, I wasn't looking for someone who was interested in being a press agent. And that's all it is. And you happen to be right out of college and you look cute and okay, come on in, I'll give you a job. The idea was, is this is somebody that this organization can both train, foster, mentor, and want to be part of the family, of the tribe, of the community? Do I see that in this person? So that if all of a sudden somebody goes to the hospital, I can say, can you do their job too? Because you already know how the organization works. You already know the other people here. Now let's see what you can do and just do the best you can, understanding it's new, but let's move you up. Let's start to combine things. Then maybe again on the leaders of the organization, they say, I don't know, we've kind of been stagnant. Maybe we need to change how the marketing office works with the advertising placement and switch things around. And maybe we take the press person and we say, we'd like you to be an assistant general manager. Now, it's not I'm switching you over to group sales or giving you a lower position, but you know how we think. Why don't you come in and do this other stuff?
Yeah.
Doesn't work with everybody. I mean, certainly you want a great press agent who's a great press agent, but they can train people.
Well, this is also how an organization ends up with a few unicorns
Mm.
because they have unique interests in these parts of the business. They end up being quite valuable to the organization. So it also allows the organization to sort of lose sight of the structure that it actually needs.
Mhm.
If you have one person who, perhaps your marketing director is so savvy that they're doing some development work and they're also doing some, artistic work as well. And so you're thinking, maybe I don't need another artistic associate, or maybe I don't need a development associate because this person is there. So you remove those line items from your budget. And so now you don't even have the money to consider them
Right.
because you took them out of your budget, which I think ultimately what happens, like if somebody leaves an organization who's having a tough time might just think about, well, if I don't fill that position, that's a whole salary that, I don't have to worry about. And it might give my budget a little bit of a buffer.
It is the
But
prop. It's a
Yeah.
problem of all theater budgets. We're working on a shoestring. The truth is, the best line in any budget is the contingency line.
Mhm.
You want somebody to say, I don't know which department, but when somebody shines, I don't want to lose them. So
Yeah.
how do I move them around or give them a position or pay them correctly or find a different department that we didn't even have before? Because I discovered they're great at graphic design. And we never had graphic design, but for 6 months, let's see what they do with graphic design. I'd like to add them. You don't want to have your budget so tight that you have no flexibility based on the personalities of the people you
Mhm.
have working for you.
Yeah. And if you can't seize the opportunity, in a timely manner, you'll potentially lose that person.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is, yeah, it's always something to think about. Of course, on top of everything, you wanna keep the lights on and keep the people that you do have on payroll paid. So I know it's not as easy as we're explaining it, but it's like this is I consider this to be an opportunity. If you see this in your budget, why do you have that? Because we don't wanna miss the opportunity to elevate one of our team
Right.
members. Okay, wow, that makes sense. I can stand by that and support that. Yeah, I don't know, like, what are the responses when you tell someone who funds your organization that, so and so left your organization and you didn't fill that position again? It's like, I understand the money portion of it, but why did you have that position filled in the first place if you didn't value it? If it wasn't necessary to the
If it
organization?
wasn't necessary. And if it was necessary and you're in a financial bind, you can
Mhm.
explain it that way. But
Yeah,
if you can't explain it that way, just, well, we're saving some money because we're tight, then I'm saying you're not running your organization right.
correct.
And
And
so
and
why
it's the
would I
same.
fund you? Right?
Yeah.
Doesn't make sense.
If you can't afford a finance manager, perhaps you can afford a quarterly bookkeeper,
Right.
somebody who comes in a capacity to make sure that things are great. You just don't have full-time opportunity for them. And yeah, exactly. Like that's the thing. It's like you didn't lose all of the money when that person left. It's just you don't have to pay a full salary right now, but that doesn't mean that this line item isn't still in use. You
Mhm.
still need to you still need some of the tasks that are done in there, and passing them on to people who were never in these roles to begin with is not only a slap in the face, especially if you're not thinking about how to increase their pay to take on this extra work. It is a lot of what I've experienced in
It's all
terms of, like, we all
I
have to rally together.
and I think it's incompetent. You don't do that to an organization, forget the human involved in it. You just don't do that. Look, we theater organizations get caught in the bind, especially look what's happened with the government pulling funds. In England, it's even worse. They are cutting it out of their budget, and England was noted for their funding of the arts. And now they're just throwing it and saying, you're not getting anything. And there are theater companies closing. So we look at, okay, that's uniquely difficult. And my argument is if you are in charge of an organization, you are either creative enough to change and pivot with the circumstances you are given, or you are going to fold. The idea of making people work harder for the same or less money without the competent help to support them is not a good reason to exist in the creative arts. I made a general statement. I'll stick by it, and that's the truth.
Yeah. So, in our show notes, you can click the link to read the full report of Hard Hustle Survival. The report sheds light on realities of making a living and a life in the theater. It'd just be very useful. There's a couple other show notes in there, things that we just wanted you to be aware of that we weren't going to fully talk about. Tom Stoppard, master playwright. has died at the age of 88, but his playwriting career spanned over 6 decades, and there are many plays that you may know, in his body of work, like Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead, for example, and, so there's more information there in that note that we posted there. Also, there's an article about a homophobic slur that is very much alive and vibrant in theater, and you'll have to look at the notes to see what that is, but I thought those were interesting points to just bring to your attention. But that's the business of theater, a working title. I'm Darnell Radford,
I'm Mitch Weiss.
and we'll see you at the theater.
Yeah.